And so what would happen is you would leave a Christmas treat or a holiday treat or whatever on somebody's doorstep, and then you'd leave a note and say, "You've been elf, now it's your turn to elf somebody else." And so we kind of, it's kind of like sending the love along,
You're listening to The Shift Show, where we use psychological insight to unravel the craziness of life for you. You growth mindset person, you. Tune in every other Thursday to hear some wacky psychologists demystify what exactly is happening in that weird organ that lives inside your skull. And for this especially delicious podcast experience, we can thank our friends at Shift Psych, the people who deliver a results-driven and innovative approach in therapy land. Throughout the podcast, we'll throw down some serious psych gems, but these are certainly not a replacement for treatment by a psychologist or a psychiatrist. So please seek one out if you need help.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Shift Show. My name is Zac Erickson. Joining me,
Andrea McTagg.
And we are here tonight. We have a really, I'm really excited about tonight, Andrea, because we are talking with two great people who, we've talked in previous episodes about, we had our episode about loneliness, and we've talked about like social connection and why it's so important. It's such just an important part of being a human being.
Massively insulating factor against like physical stuff and mental health stuff, but also it's fun, right? It's fun, it's purpose, etc.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so tonight we have two awesome, exciting guests. We have Jay Summach, who is the Westmount window editor, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. And we also have Carla Stolte, who is the past president of the Westmount Community League here in Edmonton as well. And we're talking about about community, about how you why it's important, how do you do it, like what all of those sorts of things. And so I'm really excited for that. So.
Well, because I think one of the things that we were talking about before in one of our previous podcasts, and I think something that comes up quite often in our sessions with people is, as we move into a modern society, or as we've moved away from those, front porches and the borrow a cup of sugar kind of thing into this urban planning suburbia, the big front garage doors and backyards, we got less and less, less and less opportunity to just naturally connect with our neighbors, and less community leagues, less social connectivity in that. So we're looking at Westmount specifically because it's kind of an old school neighborhood that's kicking it like even more old school in the best kind of ways. So that's why we're chatting.
Yeah, absolutely.
These lovely two today.
Cool. Absolutely. And so welcome. Yeah.
Thank you.
For people at home that are listening. So tell us a little bit about, who do we want to start with? Like, tell me just a little bit about yourself. Like, let's start with
ladies first.
Ladies first. Yeah. So Carla, just tell me a little about yourself and just what makes Westmount awesome. Yeah, just tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You.
I have lived in Westmount for about 16 years, and I really love it here for a number of reasons. I think one of the reasons is, like you had talked about, Westmount is a very connected community, and we can depend on our neighbors, the front porches, the whole geography of it, it's close to downtown. It's pretty much the perfect neighborhood. So I don't know, you have to come and see it. It's pretty fantastic.
Well, I think it's interesting how, a lot of, and like we've talked about this before, how like early, like, as we're growing up, there's like, you go to school and you make friends by going to school, and it's just the people around you. And then you go to university or college, and you're friends with the people around you. And then people generally tend to like continue growing and whatever. And all of a sudden you move into a house where the garage door is the entire front of the house, and you've got like your backyard and nobody knows anybody. And suddenly everybody lives close to each other still, but I was actually thinking about this. I have lived next door to somebody for 2 years. I have no idea who they are.
And you're a talker.
I don't even know. Yeah, I don't even know their names, right? Like, and which is kind of crazy to think about. Probably because most of the time we pull into the driveway and then I'm fully like, come on, guys, like herding 4 kids into the house, right? But even then, it's something that the community is something that's so important, and yet it's almost like we've forgotten how to do it in general over the past while. And so like that doesn't seem to be the case in Westmount?
No, I think built form is a huge piece. Like you said, we don't have a lot of houses that have front car garages. There's a few in the neighborhood, but so much of it is front porch culture here. And
they're close together. Like
Westmount's
together. Not, you can holler at your neighbor over the fence like easily kind of thing as well.
And my experience of Westmount, initially wasn't this, but now when we talk about the old fashioned neighborhoods where you can go to your neighbor and borrow a cup of sugar, I do that all the time. It's very common. I think there's 6 or 7 neighbors that have my front door key because at some point they've needed to come into our house, and so there's a huge level of trust as well. Which
I think it's really interesting, and it's really new. Let's get to Jay. Jay, how long have you been Westmounter for?
I have been in Westmount for the 5 years since I moved back to Edmonton.
Where were you before?
I moved to Edmonton after I graduated from high school in 1990 and lived here for many years, a decade. And then I went to the States to go to grad school. And after 10 years living in the States, we had the opportunity to move back to Edmonton. Excuse me. And we didn't know what Edmonton 2.0 was going to look like for us as a family. So we decided, I decided my priority was to move into a neighborhood where I'd be within walking distance of my pallbearers.
It's so uplifting, Jay.
Hey,
it's okay. That
is the criteria to beat all criteria.
Sure,
but it's like, well, do I want to live next to you? Would I trust you to carry my body?
Right. How's your back?
You to drop that stuff or what?
Yeah.
But I mean, the idea was I had just returned from living very far from family, and I lived with people who lived very far from family, and I realized that as I move into the second half of my life, I want to be building daily relationships with people. And if I don't live next door to family or within a walking distance of family, then I have to
create that new family.
Create family around me. Yeah.
Well, and it comes out of, I think, those exchanges of those cup of sugar borrowing exchanges, or I returned a pie plate yesterday and it's, can you water my flowers when I'm gone to Jasper kind of thing. Yep. And that's really common here.
Yeah.
And I think it's becoming increasingly less common if we look at Edmonton or a lot of neighborhoods, a lot of cities overall. I guess suburban sprawl goes, it's more and more disconnected, more and more people in their houses on their screens and not interacting with the humans around them. So kind of an interesting thing. How did the two of you get involved with the Community League and the paper?
Go ahead, Jay.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. When I moved back to Edmonton 5 years ago, I knew, for the reasons I've talked about, I knew right away that I wanted to do everything I could to lay down start building relationships, start building 30-year relationships today. And so I went out to the general meeting of the Community League, and Carla was president at the time, and put my hand up and said, hey, I've taught writing, I've taught documentary work. I could handle a newspaper, and took on the magazine.
Nice.
So I think that's the first time you and I met.
I think it was that meeting at Kristen's house, actually.
Kristen. Well, we'll talk about her.
Yeah. So how I got on the Community League is I made eye contact with the wrong person.
And you're like voluntold.
So I moved from Vancouver, and we were here for about 3-4 years. And in the much more mediocre Westmount window as it was back then, there was an article and a call out for volunteers to help with the vegetable garden that is just behind the rink. it wasn't there yet, but they needed a team of people to help build it up. So I volunteered, and we worked on that, and we were building it, and we were doing a work bee. And then one of the people on the garden said, "Hey, you should come to the Community League AGM. We're having our AGM tonight." I'm like, sure, why not? Let's check it out. And then I put my hand up, and the rest is history. I've been on the board for a long time.
That's very neat. And I know you got voluntold to start with, but now that you've been on the board for a long time and been involved, do you regret the voluntold part? Or like,
no. It's, I mean, there's been challenges for sure. It's not always easy living in close proximity with people. There's conflicts, but generally it's been a really fantastic experience for just getting to know people and just being a change agent in the community. That it's a really powerful experience. Yeah.
I imagine like in that setting, like is part of that, like is the voluntold kind of thing. Cause I imagine a lot of people who maybe like move into Westmount and then all of a sudden there's like people who actually are like reaching out and like, you know, connecting. Like, is that something that people are like do people get standoffish? Do people like, is that something that people are excited about, or generally like just, I'm curious what the reaction of people who move in, like, what was it like for you?
Okay. Weird. Because like when I moved back from being away as well. And it was like in a strange place where Normal goes when Garfield sends him away. That's where I was living. And then my first introduction to, I think, any of the community spirit in Westmount was there was like a little elf, like a neighborhood elf dropped off a thing. And I was like, what is this thing?
You've been elfed.
Yeah. Do you want to maybe explain what that was?
So it was kind of a grassroots thing. And around Christmas time, I think it was about the beginning of December, middle of November, people just kind of on each block decided to elf somebody. And so what would happen is you would leave a Christmas treat or a holiday treat or whatever on somebody's doorstep, and then you'd leave a note and say, "You've been elfed, now it's your turn to elf somebody else." And so we kind of you know, it's kind of like sending the love along, you know, but it was,
pay it forward kind of thing. It was very neat though. And I think it was like you got elf, so elf 2 more people or something. So it like spreads.
Right. Yeah. Spreads.
But it was very neat. And I thought that was interesting.
It's like a pyramid scheme of joy.
Pyramid scheme of festivity. But I thought that was an interesting thing. And I think it's very apparent. Like I know you were saying the walkability score was something that drew you to Westmount. But it's a different experience, I think, when you're in Westmount and you realize like how connected and how many initiatives. Do you maybe want to tell us a little bit about, there's the elf thing, nice walkability score, but what else does Westmount have that's really creating that connectivity? Like what do y'all get up to?
I would say that the Westmount effect is a combination of a lot of little things. Some are human actions, initiatives. Some are elements of the built form. And I think all these little things create a tipping point, to riff on Malcolm Gladwell's tipping point idea, that Westmount isn't Westmount because of the trees or because we have a great community league. It's because there are trees which attract people outside. And when you walk by somebody's house, it's a short front yard. So the people inside that house see you. Once you've walked by their house 5 times, they recognize you. The next time you walk by, they happen to be walking out to their car, which is parked outside. And now there's the flash of recognition. Maybe they have a dog. Hi, what's your dog's name? There's an introduction. And these things just kind of snowball.
And then all of a sudden you're drinking on the porch together.
All of a sudden you're drinking on the porch together.
Yeah. I think one of the things too that's unique about Westmount, which I'm really thankful for, is the retail strip that we have as well. Like I think and we have gathering spaces in the neighborhood. Like we have 3 Vikings, we have Duchess, we have Zwick's, we have these places where people just kind of meet. Sometimes planned, sometimes not planned, but all those little connections also make a big difference.
to neighbors having a variability of use
Totally.
rather than just this
Totally.
like flat form, it's all houses and a park over there kind of thing, like that integrated and different levels of it too, where there's, you know, some townhouses and some retail and then some houses and some row houses and so on and so on. And I think that multi-use piece in there, because you both have referred now to the built form. You talked a little bit about that. We talked a little bit about how some of the negative aspects of the built form in suburbia, right? With the like meandering, single use stuff, big garage doors. Are there other aspects of the built form that exist in Westmount or neighborhoods like it that you think lend to that connectivity development?
I think the fact that we have a community school makes a huge difference. That we have a community hall. That we have, there's 3 parks, I think, 3 or 4 parks.
That was something even just in Edmonton when we moved
Westmount.
here that I was like, that's a good idea. Because I lived in Lethbridge before this and I was like, Lethbridge doesn't have that, right? Like the idea of like a community league center or whatever, like that was, or like that there's ice rinks everywhere. That was like, that's cool.
And that's actually uniquely Edmonton. If you look across North America or like the world, these community league kind of that idea is very unique to Edmonton.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And I think like historically, I know like, for example, like I grew up in Southern Alberta in like a small town and like churches historically would maybe serve that purpose, right? But as churches become, you know, less important to more people and they kind of have, you know, not that people don't go to church anymore. Right. Yeah. In secularized society. Exactly. Right. That role, I think, you know, having that still be community is still something that is important. And, I think that's great. It's very cool.
I think a lot of that diverted to schools, which is great when you have young kids. Yeah. But, you know, there is that either you're pre-kids, you have no kids, or they've kind of graduated out, they're in high school or, you know, moving on, or you're a senior in the neighborhood. Yeah. And so I noticed that Westmount seems to also do things to try to incorporate like all ages from, you know, what was it? The little stained glass windowy thing.
Window Wonderland.
For the little guys. And then, but there's also like a senior social or some such thing, right? That you've got on. So how does this, maybe do you want to talk to us about like, how does this all come together? I know you're both involved in the Abundant Community Initiative. So this is not totally throwing darts randomly, right? A little bit. Do you want to chat with us a little bit about what is that? And tell us a little bit about that.
So Abundant Community Edmonton is actually a really grassroots initiative that actually started in Highlands by a guy named Howard Lawrence. And it has morphed into a City of Edmonton endorsed program, so to speak. So basically, the premise behind that is there is one person on each block called a block connector who is kind of the go-to person for all the people on that block.
Okay.
And so they go around, they're super intentional about neighboring or being a good neighbor or reaching out to people and talking to them and finding out what their interests are, finding out what they like to do, finding out where their gifts and skills might be used in the community. And then, so each block is supposed to have one of those people on it. And then those block connectors then kind of gather together that information and try to connect people. So there's somebody on my block who loves to knit. And so there's somebody on Sarah's block who loves to knit. And there's somebody on Kim's block who loves to knit. So let's bring them together and maybe
like a knitting bee.
They'll get a knitting club and then other people might join. And so that's kind of the premise of it. So it's very grassroots.
With the Abundant Community, that's a book, right? There is some literature around that a little bit.
Yeah. John McKnight and Peter Block wrote it. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. And so do you find it easy? And this is where I guess Zac was saying, you know, it's a bit weird at first when you come from a community or a lack of community sense, you know, when you go open your door and there's like this elf thing and you're like, what's happening with this? That wasn't a thing
And like,
before.
just like your neighbor comes over and all of a sudden sees something knitted and be like, oh, you like knitting? I know this person and this person and this person who all like knitting.
Right.
Do you want to talk to them?
Well,
And like,
it's a little bit more subtle than that.
It's one thing. I think the reason we're kind of honing in on that is because so much in our practice, we see people just feeling like often they're going to be a burden to somebody for doing that reach out or that extra 5 minutes of conversation or whatnot. Yeah. So it's nice that this almost flips that a little bit. Do you find that people are willing to, or like what's the receptiveness of being one and then not and all of that stuff?
I was a block connector on our block, and my wife and I we had a good excuse for walking around the neighborhood and introducing ourselves because we had just moved into the house. So sort of a reverse meet the neighbors initiative there. But I have a neighbor down the street who said to another neighbor about my wife and I, that Jay and Ann, there is something wrong with them.
What, you friendly, crazy people?
Yeah.
It's like the Stepford Wives or like whatever that is.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Where it's like, there's no way they're not.
Well, there's definitely some people who love it. Totally. And some people who, like, I was a block connector as well. And I would knock on people's door and they wouldn't answer. And so at some point there's a spectrum of people's tolerance for that.
They just don't want to buy whatever you're selling, or
right. And it's years. Like, it literally takes years. It's not a 1 month thing. Like, it's just a continual.
Well, my husband says that I like haven't passed that 5-year-old stage where, you know, you show up at the park and you're like, do you want to be my friend? Like, legit. And Zac will attest to this for sure. Yeah. But it sounds like the block connectors are kind of, you know, meant to kick it to that level, right? Back to that, like, hey, do you want to be friends? And then some people will. Yeah.
And host parties or like block parties and that kind of thing. Though, you know, just invitational, let's get to know our neighbors. Kind of,
and like interact a little bit. Well, because what we found is most of the time, I'd say, like, you know, there's like I said, there's some people that self-select out, but most of the time what we're seeing is most people are craving that. And I think maybe that's what's creating that close-knit thing and quality that makes Westmount really desirable. In fact, I think it's been on Avenue's top 10 list for top communities in Edmonton to live in for a while now.
Yeah.
Do you think that like part of it is like that over time as people have become more isolated, more, you know, individual units, that there's almost this expectation of, well, like you were saying, like, this is going to be me. I'm going to be a burden if I go and reach out to these people that I just moved in next to. And then we start to expect that from each other to the point where it's like, listen, if you do that to me, then I'm going to have to do that to you. And I'm going to have to like reach out. And now we also don't even have any practice doing it, right? Like, I don't know how to reach out to my neighbor. I've never done that before.
Like, it's like a skill degradation.
Yeah, no, but it actually isn't. It's just saying, hi.
Yeah.
That's all. That's how it starts.
Absolutely.
I think as human beings, you're right. I think people overthink it.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, totally overthink it.
It's not actually, I don't think it's actually that hard, but it feels like.
Yes, it feels very overwhelming. Because it is hard. It's hard. It's like being the 5-year-old on the playground and saying, "Can I play with you?" You're very vulnerable. And that's hard.
We're very afraid of rejection too,
Absolutely.
right? So it's like we're more apt to pull back.
Yeah.
But I think it's also creating new habits, right? Like, so for both of you now, it sounds like saying hi to the neighbor, borrowing that cup of sugar, whatever, hanging out, getting a little tipsy on the porch seems like it is the new pathway, like that's been kind of walked. So that's the norm. Is that kind of a little bit? Or just like there's some assholes on the block that we still want to like be like, nah.
There's always going to be the grassy old man next door though, right?
There will be, yeah.
Not to be like ageist.
Well, no, but there's like an asshole quotient.
Sure.
It's in any population.
Yeah.
I think
young or old.
There are other ways. There are other ways to live. I mean, I can have a vibrant social life, a group of friends spread across the city.
Yeah.
And I can have a vibrant social life when I'm a student on campus. I can have a vibrant social life when I'm in the workforce and I work in a big company. I can have a vibrant social life when I retire and I volunteer. But there comes a time when the footprint of your life shrinks or it gets smaller. Often that comes with old age. So when I talked about the fact that I moved into Westmount to be close to my pallbearers,
Mm-hmm.
it's a weird thing to say, but I absolutely mean it.
Mm-hmm.
I am building now the relationships that are going to be important to me in 30 years when I'm not on campus, when I'm not at school, when I may lose my license and I can't drive,
Mm-hmm.
when my friends and families are far flung. Well, then who is my world? It's
Mm-hmm.
the people I can see from my front step. Mm-hmm. And if I didn't start building those relationships 30 years earlier,
Mm-hmm.
then there's no currency to exchange. By that point, it's too late.
It's an interesting thing because you say, you talk about the end of life, but I think there's also times where being tied and being close geographically matters too. Like if you're a mom with like little ones at home and you're like, I got to nip to the store. Can you watch baby? Or if you're 10 years old, it's really nice to have that friend
Absolutely.
one block down.
Yeah.
So I think it can be beneficial at all stages, that geographical closeness that is, and it's not at exclusion, right? Like you said, you can have wonderful colleagues and a wonderful music group or whatever, but we're just like layering on that social connectivity and growing it because you don't have to remove one to have the other.
Yeah.
Right? Like I think that's awesome.
Yeah. And I think for me, the richness of having people close by is that you can actually just walk there. It takes literally 3 minutes. You're not driving across the city for half an hour, which you've already done to and from work. Yeah. Then going to see friends who live in, wherever.
You gotta plan it.
You have to plan it. You have to make sure they're going to be there. But if I spend 3 minutes, walk over to somebody's house and say, oh, they're not there. Oh, well, I'll just keep walking. Go to the next friend who's 2 more minutes. There's just...
I think it almost like increases your social connectivity just because it's like a happen chance. Like it's easy. Like the other day I was out in my yard and a neighbor's out in her yard and she's saying, oh, did you see the new puppy? And it just, it's very organic, I think, as opposed to that, like, okay, I'll meet you for coffee at 3 on the south side at Remedy or blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think there's like some interesting benefits that come from that geographical thing, which neighborhoods are clearly like a huge piece of.
Yeah. And I think the diversity in Westmount too is really powerful when you from a social capital perspective. Is that when you are in relationship with people who are not like you, it really can kind of make your world a little bit bigger, and I think it depolarizes our lives a little
100%.
bit.
Promotes a lot of compassion as well.
Absolutely.
Right? And a little bit of a check on your own thing. Like I know even on our street, the income diversity is massive.
Totally.
Massive.
Yeah.
We've got a low income block of apartments.
Yeah.
A huge variability up till, 1.5 million houses on the same block in the span of 20 houses, which is kind of interesting. And then that social capital kind of gets spread out a little bit. So,
but when you're all sitting around at a block party, it's like, well, you're my neighbor. I don't care if your house is worth 1.5 million. Well,
I like
do
the
a little bit,
pie you
but
make. You're talking about like Westmount is having not only a diversity of function with the retail spaces, but also a diversity of people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a very, very diverse community when you look at the demographics.
So, do you think then? Based on that, like we've talked about when we remove that stuff and got into, say, our suburban landscape where it was a lot more planned and a lot more, like there are those neighborhoods where you can drive into. And I mean, one of our friends, and I hope he doesn't listen to the podcast. Anyway, so many people just shouldn't. They just shouldn't listen to it.
It's going to be hard to make this grow if we keep doing this.
I've driven. Don't be a big deal. No, I've driven to his house. I don't know, 20 times. But you have to think about it every time because there's also a diversity of the actual architecture.
Yeah.
And like I'm not going to mix up your house probably with your house or my house. They look different, and there's something I think novel with humans with that front yards being planted differently, etc.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
How do you think it kind of goes then if you are in a community that is all the same? We can still take some of those things. We don't have the built form stuff that maybe we've been blessed with in Westmount.
Yeah.
But what do you think outside of the built form, outside of the structure and the diversity of, the use, like the land use and the building use. What else kind of defines Westmount from, say, another neighborhood that looks like that or has that retail strip or whatnot? Where would you go from there into what kind of makes it a little bit different? Because there's a really strong community league here, but some other stuff too, some other initiatives you guys have done
for
very
sure.
purposely.
The league is a very robust board, more robust than most, I would say, like 95%. There's a lot of people on the board.
And how did they do? Like, how did you guys get that?
Well, some people were pissed off at some of the decisions that the board was making, and so they joined the board, which is fantastic because it's diversity of thought again, right? Yeah. Our board doesn't look as diverse as our community, which is something that I think we'd all like to see different. So there's that constant thing. But I think what the community league is really good at is, and Jay, maybe you can speak to this too, but like empowering people if they have an idea, really supporting them in that, and then helping them be successful in it. So things like the Canada Day breakfast, that was Bridget's thing, and she really wanted to do this, and then we helped her get it off and running. Once it's done then it's pretty easy to continue. Shop the Hall is another one. Window Wonderland was something that the board really supported. Like,
can you give us a little bit of just for our listeners, can you break down a couple of those things? Like what's Shop the Hall like?
So Shop the Hall is an arts and craft fair that is held in November at the Hall. So we try to get local artists, as local as we can. So first priority goes to Westmount artists and artisans, and then we kind of branch out from there. But it's mostly just for us to have another gathering space one day out of the year. So that's Shop the Hall. Of course, COVID I don't know what that's going to look like.
That's a whole nother.
The pancake breakfast is obviously, that's a pancake breakfast. It's organized. So that's actually a huge draw for the seniors across the way.
Yeah.
We get a lot of seniors for that. And that's one of the demographics that we have a really hard time engaging with. But they seem to really like coming for the food.
That's good though, right?
That's good, yeah.
You figure out what works with that.
Yeah.
It seems like you're almost like in creating an environment where anybody who comes forward is like, what would be cool is this. And just sort of like the culture of like, yeah, let's do that, right? And like, let's give it a shot, and like kind of just everybody rally together and try and make things work to engage in all of these different demographics and just different groups of people.
Well, and I think by having that diversity of things, whether it's like a pancake breakfast or Shop the Hall or Oktoberfest.
Amazing Race. Amazing Race.
What's Amazing Race?
Awesome.
How do I not know?
There was an Amazing Race Westmount it was very fun. It was fantastic.
What was that? What was that like? Jay, can you tell us a little bit about that?
The Amazing Race, patterned on the TV show. So however many it was, 15 stations, some themed around Westmount history, some just themed about being ridiculous. And teams competed for actually an impressive catalog of prizes from area vendors, local vendors.
Yeah.
That sounds fun.
Great.
Like, how fun does that sound? Like, that sounds great. Fun. So there's a ton of different. Do you guys have these on your website, like listed, like all of the things that go on for the year? Or do you put them? How do you communicate to your residents? I'm guessing like about what's going on. How do you? Because that's another thing is like you can have all the cool events, but how do you get everybody engaged? Mm-hmm. Like how is that happening?
We have a few communication channels that are pretty active. Social media, Facebook, Insta. Those sorts of things. We do have a website that lists events. We even have a sign-up notification list, I think, Ursula Boras maintains. So we push notifications out that way.
Okay.
And then we also have this magazine that we can talk about.
Yes.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
But that's, it was interesting because like the elf showing up on my step. When I first moved into Westmount, there's this like funny little paper thing that showed up, and I noticed my neighbors because I lived in a triplex, and everyone would get it, and the flyers and stuff like that got all left,
yes,
and everyone's like it's a very engaged readership.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
and I became one of those very engaged readers that it's like every single, and then you recognize the names. You're like, oh, so-and-so wrote an article, or so-and-so's on the board, or, oh, this is, Duchess,
or, hey,
the
that's
bakery
my
around.
blog. There's a picture of my blog in there. Yeah.
Definitely. All kinds of crazy things.
Yeah.
So two questions. Did Westmount always have a community league?
Pretty close.
Yes.
Yeah?
You
For a long time?
You have to have, they had a community league board. So you, in order to establish a community league, you have to have a group of people aboard.
Okay.
We were established in 1919.
Whoa.
Westmount. So we are
kicking old school here.
one of the oldest neighborhood.
Second oldest.
Jasper Place is the first, I think. Yeah.
Very interesting. And then did it always have a newsletter? Do you call it a newsletter, newspaper? What do we call it?
I call it. You're welcome to call it a newsletter.
It's not a
Newspaper?
newsletter. It
Is
is
it a
a
newspaper?
magazine.
Magazine? Do we call it a magazine? I'm like, the booklet. I just call it the window, the Westmount window. So I don't.
Yeah, the Westmount window. I didn't start it. I inherited it. Many people faithfully put time into putting together that newsletter, but it's changed from being, sort of the photocopied, stapled in the
Mediocre.
corner circular, into being a full color 48-page magazine that we publish quarterly.
Yeah, like it's a book of things, and there's like ads and stories, and so how long has that been around for?
Well, in its current form, it's been almost 5 years, I guess.
Yeah.
It's when I took it on. Carla, I think you were editor sort of before me.
Yeah.
And you had already started sort of writing drip campaign editorials about, what does it mean to be a good neighbor? What could you do? Featuring people in the neighborhood. And I ran with that and grew the window from that seed. A lot of newspapers or a lot of community newsletters in town tend to be, I think, what you'd expect.
Like a bulletin.
It's a bulletin.
Like, this is happening tomorrow. Blah blah
It
blah.
lists
blah.
some events. It lists some issues for people to be angry about, crime or not picking up after your dog. Sort of issue. So it's events focused.
Community scolding.
It's more like the like the news where it's like, here's 16 bad things, also an ad.
Yeah.
Yes.
As opposed to, anything inspiring. But I think the window has a very inspirational tone to it.
Oh, absolutely.
It's very positive.
Super
I like that,
positive,
when, I don't know, I think you guys were highlighting a local kid explaining, I don't know, something. It's cute. Like it's very cute. Or talking about, during COVID, there was an article about, working from home with kids, like very relatable content that's readable.
Right.
Which is interesting. So when did it morph from that bulletin sort of style, which I imagine like back in the day it was, to creating?
So I looked at, we have a whole 15 boxes of archived documents in the community league, and a few of us cleaned it out. And I found some from the 80s, which were the news bulletin more kind of things. When I took it over, it was still that kind of news bulletin-y thing. And it was probably, I did it for 5 years before you, maybe. So it's been evolving for a number of years, but it's really fantastic now. Yeah.
And do you guys publish an online copy of it as well?
It's posted online. You can access it through Westmount Community
It's a
League.
PDF, yeah.
Because I think that might be interesting for some of our listeners who are non-Westmounters to maybe see an example of a community newsletter or magazine that's been done well, that is more of a positive tone. Because I think when you switch the tone from that bulletin kind of information dump kind of thing into more of a inspirational messaging, really positive, that almost speaks to a change in the culture of that community as well, right? You talk a lot about like that, the same feeling of, did you call them block connectors?
Block connectors, yeah.
And, the borrow a cup of sugar, the window has that feel to it, which I think is an interesting thing to be able to embody in a magazine.
Yeah. There's a couple of things I can point at or that I bear in mind as we're putting our issues together. And we have a team of probably a dozen people now who write and take photos and write poetry, sell ads. So it's a group effort. But the two things I bear in mind, one comes from an experience I had when I was 20 years old, and I was a natural a natural history interpreter at the Calgary Zoo, meaning I was the kid in the cargo shorts, being the crocodile hunter, talking about tigers and
Nice.
teaching. And one of the vision mainstays of zoos, there's this little quote. I don't know. It's one of these ones that floats around. Maybe Winston Churchill said, probably not. Maybe John J. Audubon said it, maybe not. But the saying...
He totally did.
I think he probably did.
Yeah.
The saying goes like this, and you'll see why it would be a favorite of zoos.
Mm-hmm.
People will only protect what they love, and people can only love what they know.
Mm.
So in the zoo setting, why do
Mm-hmm.
we bring people in to see animals? So that they fall in love with them, and then we'll protect them in their natural environments.
Mm.
So my vision for the window is give people enough exposure to the people and the stories and the things that they can see around them. Once they know it, once they know who those people are, then they can begin to love them. And that's where real, neighborliness grows out of.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's very powerful. It just speaks to like the power of narrative to promote those connections, whether it's to a building or the neighbor.
That's right.
That's very neat. I like it.
Do you know the show Afterlife? The Ricky Gervais comedy. It's on Netflix.
I love him.
Yeah.
Ricky Gervais is fantastic. And your pallbearer thing is right in line with his dark ass humor.
Yeah, it's very
Right?
funny. He's very sweary in the most
Yes.
sobering
In
British
the most
sense.
delightful way.
Yeah.
But he, in that show, plays a staff writer for a small village newspaper. And late in the first season, he makes a comment that made my hair stand up, which was, I just think that everybody deserves to be in their local newspaper once. That was a bad Ricky Gervais.
No, but
statement,
it makes sense that, and especially as a kid, like I grew up in St. Albert. So there's the St. Albert Gazette, again, local paper, this hockey team from the high school won or whatever.
Yeah.
But I remember that moment when, you would get your dance competition or whatever would be in. And it was just like you were a superstar and felt important, not just
Absolutely.
to your family, but to your community and recognized. And, your mom would then get the phone call. Did you know that Andrea's in the paper today? Whatever. And, it's something and it creates this cohesion. So it's almost like you're using the window to create a net of cohesive information.
That's right.
And trading of stories and also a dissemination for knowledge. Because I know my brothers are both huge historic home buffs.
Oh, yeah.
My home does not reflect that. Well, it was terrible. They all still listen to this podcast. We're going to go with that. When I was buying this one, and we built in Westmount, we're in an infill in Westmount as we record this right now, actually. But it was a teeny tiny little old shack that was painted like pumpkin orange. It was 600 square feet. So it wasn't exactly what you would call restorable. Now I like to mess with my brothers though, because they have a problem with tearing down historic homes, which is totally reasonable. So I took a picture of a very beautiful historic home and I said, I bought this. These are the new plans for it. And then
I bought this national monument.
Fighting words.
yeah, it was funny though. But I think one thing that's, yes, I almost got my ass kicked over that one. Did it on the phone. Wouldn't have actually done that in person. But one thing that I thought was nice is one of the reasons that both of them live in Westmount is because there is that preservation of also the history of it in the physical form as well. So not only is the physical form kind of being preserved more and more, but also these old school relationships, which I think is kind of nice. So it's like kicking it old school in all forms and all the best ways.
Yeah.
Westmount does, for whatever reason. Again, I have no reason to believe that the people who live in Westmount are smarter than people outside of Westmount, or are more caring, or that they're more extroverted.
No.
But I think there's a critical mass of people here who have learned to behave in a particular way. So when a person moves into our neighborhood, they have exposure to that. Oh, this is
they get elfed and stuff.
They get elfed. Oh, this is a script I hadn't considered. I never thought about being, I know people on my street. I didn't know people on my last street. This is interesting. So there's the combination of exposure and then opportunity, because the board is so active, for that subset of people who get the exposure to community, who decide to volunteer. Well, there's opportunities they can plug into right away. So I think you get a virtuous, the virtuous cycle feeding itself.
Like pulls it in.
Well, and I imagine that there's also this other part of it too, of that, does it also breed like authenticity and like, oh wow, I'm actually like part of something greater than myself, but also I feel known by other people, and therefore I feel valued, and now all of a sudden, like, my self-worth is increasing, and like all of that sort of stuff. Even on an individual level, you're going to have that effect too. And so then, like you said, like then the snowball starts to build, and then all of a sudden it's contagious as well, because you're like, well, wait a minute, what's going on? And at first it's going to seem like, wow, there's something seriously wrong with these people, right? But then all of a sudden you're on the receiving end of it, and you're like, oh, actually, no, this feels like how it should be.
Well, and Zac, and I know, like, when we're working with clients, like in the psychology realm, there's this thing called mirroring theory, which is, mirroring.
Yep.
Right? So
like a mirror.
People are very like monkey see, monkey. I know I'm so
totally. No, you're good.
Explanations of things. But people are very monkey see, monkey do. So if I see you talking to and befriending your neighbor, and I see you getting involved with the paper, it's much more likely that I'm just this is the social norm of this entire area. And then that's what like promotes that culture. So it sounds like it is that snowball effect that comes out of these like.
Plus, we're also like hardwired to do this kind of stuff anyway. And part of the reason why we all feel so isolated in most places is because we are hardwired to do it, and that need is not being filled.
The village.
And so all of a sudden, you actually you are on the receiving end of it, you're like, oh, I didn't even realize I needed this, but holy cow, did I need this?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's something where, and we've gotten into this in various other discussions about what is creating that disconnect with people and how hard it is to, supersede it. So it's really nice to be on a podcast for once that's like talking about how it's done really, really amazingly well. Zac, I'm going to pick on you for a second.
Okay, yeah, go.
Because we're like 3 Westmount.
Sure, yeah, do it.
3 on 1, let's go. So when you hear, Carla and Jay talk about me getting helped, and I clearly need to be more involved in my community league. That is not lost on me at the moment. But when you hear this kind of reality of a neighborhood, you don't live in a neighborhood like that. So what is your experience with that? Like, how does it
it's funny because actually, as we've been talking, I've realized like I actually grew up in southern Alberta, just outside of Lethbridge, in a town made of like 3,000 people, right? And it literally was like, you go to the grocery store and you see your high school teacher there, or you see, right? Like, it was literally just like, it was that.
What town was that?
It was Raymond. Which don't hold it against me. I didn't play sports, but it was, like that was something that I did grow up with. And I sort of have realized now, like, that it was, the positives of that you almost don't realize are gone until you're like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. That was not right. And so like, that's actually kind of what I'm realizing now and thinking, and I think that for me, at least, like, why don't I do that now? Well, there are things. I think part of it is, a lot of like busyness culture and, like that sort of consumerism, like all that sort of stuff that, so many other things that could get in the way. And not that you don't have time to literally go next door for 5 minutes and say hi, right? But just that those are things that, and this maybe is a question to you of like what are some of the things that even people at home could be mindful of, right? Because I think that there are more obstacles in place now. And so like, how do we intentionally like push through that and keep going anyway? Or maybe that is the answer to, it's a question that answers itself, but.
It is. And I think you can bring elements of what is happening in Westmount into your like everyday exchange, right? So we might go outside of our neighborhood and be at, I don't know, the Safeway. Well, it's not hard to take that extra 2 minutes to have that conversation with the girl about like, was your day busy? Like, how has COVID been for you? Or, whatever, like those extra 5 minutes of conversation. And then the next time she's there. So you can bring elements from those neighborhood interactions out, even if you don't have a neighborhood that is as lucky as Westmount to have, the structures that you guys mentioned and the things. And then also, bringing them in, bleeding them in, the suburban culture or.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if I think of the friends of mine who live in the suburbs in the typical front car garage house, they will often work with their garage door up, for example, so that when they see somebody passing, they'll wave at them and say hi, or they'll spend extra time out gardening. Like they'll weed excessively, even though they don't. Yeah, even if they don't have weeds, they'll just pretend to be weeding so that they have an excuse. That's not weird. Like it is kind of weird to sit out there on your driveway.
It's less weird with COVID. Right.
Right. No, that's true. That's true. That could be used.
In our cul-de-sac in St. Albert that I grew up on, it was like a bunch of the same age kids. And the parents would put the lawn chairs on the driveway and the kids would play, street hockey or whatever in the front instead, like utilizing the front yards. That
kid factor, I think, is one of the things that makes it really easy to meet other people.
Yeah.
I guess if you're a single person living in a front car garage, it would be kind of odd for you to sit out there by yourself drinking a beer, waiting for somebody to pass by.
If you didn't know your neighbor, though, right? And then you just bring them over, and then the two of you are drinking. No, but even we were I think it was in Jasper last week, and my business partner and his girlfriend came with me, and they were talking about this complicated irrigation system for their plants. They got these like tomato things or whatever. We're indoor cat people, so this is like a big accomplishment. They're like 3 tomato plants, but this is a big conversation about this irrigation system. And I was like, well, why don't you just get your neighbor to water them?
Yeah.
And that, it really hit on a poignant, because the minute those stupid words were out of my like little Westmount face, right? Because I would have just been like, well, my neighbor's just going to water them and I'm going to give her shit if she kills them.
Yeah.
Like that's how that's going to go. It's that like that answer of like, I don't know my neighbor. I've lived in that condo for 10 years, but I don't know my neighbor enough to be like, hey, can you throw some water on these tomato things?
Yeah.
So I think like stealing those little things. And,
absolutely.
Maybe it's elfing your neighbor. Or dropping
absolutely.
off muffins if you make a big batch or whatever.
Finding somebody on your block that'll do a block party with you. But finding somebody else to do it, I think is really important. It's hard to do it on your own, because what if nobody shows up? That was my fear when I first did it. I talked to my next door neighbor. I'm like, can you host it with me? So at least we're sitting out there together. And it was super successful. Like lots of people came and they just love gathering. Like
this sounds like people just daring to. Daring to suggest the idea or daring to pop over. And like you said, you just went knocking on doors, which is
It also has the knock-on effect. Partnering with people. Yes, it shares the load of putting on an event, for instance. But it also does this productive neighborhood tangling thing. So if I have Carla over for dinner, Carla and Mike, and Anna and I have you over, we're building a relationship, you to me.
Yeah.
Now, Zac, do you live alone, partner?
Married with 4 children.
So if
wants to be alone sometimes.
There's a reason I didn't.
That's why he's doing this podcast with me tonight.
If my wife and I have you and your family over for dinner, you and I build a relationship.
Yep.
Andrea, partner, Mike. If I have Andrea and Mike over for dinner, you and I are building a relationship. Look at the load now on me as a community activist. It is all on me.
Yeah.
And if I move, I get a job in Ottawa. Off I go, and all of that work leaves with me.
Yeah.
But if I have a dinner party and I have Carla and Mike and Andrea over, now we're building a relationship, but you're building a relationship with each other.
Yeah.
And then if I have Zac and your family and Carla and Mike over, you're building a relationship so that down the road, pretty soon you're relating to each other. The load is not on me.
Yeah.
I'm not the single point of failure for this whole community building
It's
exercise.
Like an insulating web.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, and I imagine too that then those end up going, you're connecting with all these different ones individually where one individual person isn't.
That's where we also get into, like, if we go back to evolutionary psychology structures, that's what is insulating to people. Like if you have a social web and one of the thing falls, right? Like, so say Zac gets sick. Well,
We're all going to rally
the
around.
little web breaks, but if there's like everybody around, they can completely insulate that. So now maybe we don't have to worry about, like, maybe Zach's wife doesn't have to worry about the kids. We've got that. We've got dinner. We've got sitting. Like you start to share, and it goes back to that. What we talk about at Shift is removing a lot of the barriers to modern life and getting back to what our natural evolutionary structures are, which are village orientations, which are multiple attachment figures for kids, which are those sorts of things. And then also like safety, even if you've got, like, my neighbor Anita over there, we passed you on the street yesterday. Anita is the resident busybody on the street. But, you know, somebody tried to break into my garage. Her son's like on it. It's like there's eyes on this street, which is protective for everybody. Yeah. And I tell her that she's my best security system. I was like, I don't know why I put this other security system.
When you were gone on Friday, see, the fact that you heard about it, I didn't even tell you.
Well, because Zach was coming to do some podcasting because the podcast studio's in the house. And I got a text when I was away. It was like, hey, guys around, is that cool with you? Blah, blah, blah. Because, you know, we haven't seen, because she hadn't met you yet. Yeah. But there's eyes on the street, on the back, on the house, and on the kids and stuff like that. So when they're maybe playing out in front. So there are so many insulating factors, I think, for having a well-connected community, not to mention on a personal level, like you said, your pallbearers. Or, you know, that cup of sugar when you're in the middle of the pie and you're like, damn it. Yeah. I got this far. I am finishing this. Somebody give me the damn sugar. I've done that like many times.
It's usually eggs for me, but you always have some.
She asked me, she's like, do you buy groceries? I was like, look, I'm not domestic, okay? This stuff. I'm like, come to a podcast with me. I'll walk you through that one, but without fucking anything else. The pie thing, that's a bit of a different one. Okay, so Zach, learned some amazing stuff about communities and had great examples from these two lovely people who have donated their time. Yeah. To not only their community, but us today.
Yes, absolutely.
Anything else that you want to add? For if we're thinking about other people wanting to replicate this, whether they have the built form structures or they just want to steal some of the delicious, sexy little Westmount tips, and get really jealous, and maybe all of our housing,
is there anything, like, if there are people out there who are hearing this and be like, oh, I want more of that, like
beg, borrow, steal.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I did, because I really needed babysitters I have 3 kids. They're now babysitters themselves. But when they were little, I organized a babysitter meet and greet. So I was like, I need to meet some babysitters in the neighborhood. So I threw it online and I threw it in the window. And
one of my clients got her babysitter from that thing that you organized. And she was like, whoever came up with that.
I know. And it was completely out of need for me to need a babysitter. And so we did it every year. We've done it every year. And now my kids are babysitters. So they're the ones who are meeting the kids. And what I discovered about that as a parent of teenagers now, it's like, wow, this is really great for my kids who are teenagers because they're meeting all these people in the neighborhood.
Great little job.
Yeah, it's a great job for a local kid. Like, there's so many benefits to it. And so a couple of neighborhoods from, I think Summerside and one on the north end, they emailed me and said, can we do this? I'm like, yeah, it's not patented. Here's the Google form it was super easy to put together. Like, it wasn't that hard.
So you're not going to send them a cease and desist or anything?
No, like I shared it and they did it and it was successful. Like, it was, absolutely. Don't be afraid to ask. I think all of our people would be more than willing to help out.
All right. So on that topic then, we're going to share, if you're okay with it, is there a way that people can get a hold of you if they want to steal your IP on how to do, whether it's the babysitter thing or else?
Yeah, for sure.
How would people contact you?
I think the best way would be to go through either the Westmount Community League Facebook page, and then the administrator will get you or whoever into the right inbox, or email Arthur Reston, who's the president of the Community League. So it's president.wcl@gmail.com.
And you're on Twitter as well?
I am.
Can we tweet at you?
Yeah.
It's
I'm not really
Carla.
great on
Right.
Twitter.
We'll skip that.
DM me on Instagram. DM me on Instagram. That's way better.
What's your
There you go,
Instagram,
yeah.
Carla?
It's Carla Stolte, CarlaStolte. Very creative, very creative.
Skip the Twitter, do the Insta.
Yeah, Insta is
and
better.
Jay,
Cool.
if people want to steal your stuff.
I'm Westmount.grayj, GRAYJ, on Instagram.
Cool.
And my tip, your tip was the babysitter meet and greet. My tip
That wasn't a tip. That was an example.
It's a good one.
I think that's a great example. Yeah, I think it's good.
I do have a tip.
We'll
I
come-
do have another tip.
Let's do
Tip
both.
and example.
Tip and example. Or several. Do a couple if you want.
I was just gonna, I'm not sure if this is a tip or an example. My tip example is be available.
That was going to be mine. Be present.
Well, I beat you to it. Like living in having connections to your neighbors happens when you have connections with your neighbors. Like it's not, a person needs to make a
Surely
little
it's
bit of
more
time.
complicated than that.
No, it means on the one hand taking a little bit of initiative.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, it means, I think this is the part that people sometimes forget because they want to be polite. The other half of taking initiative is accepting when your neighbor takes the initiative with you. So when somebody says,
So like
hey,
being gracious about that. And,
well,
yeah.
even, we're having
Get in it.
Carl and I are chatting, and I say, "Oh yeah, we're just running down to Canmore for biking, for the next week." And Carla says, "Oh, do you need somebody to cut your lawn while you're gone?" And I go, "Oh no, I got that taken care of." "Oh no, it's no problem."
Yeah.
No, say yes, even if you don't need it,
Yeah.
because it lays down a thread in the connection.
Yeah. Totally.
Gracious.
Be-
It's gracious.
Yeah.
Well, and being willing to
It's like
receive it
accepting a
too.
gift,
Yes,
Right?
I think being willing to receive it is like actually more uncomfortable for a lot of people.
Because
Yes.
we
Yeah.
think that in some reverse way that accepting somebody's offer of connection is putting them out. Andrea, you brought this
A
up before.
burden thing.
Yeah.
So hard. We actually do that limiting belief literally, like I am a burden, so often.
All the time. Yeah.
It's a lie. People don't, when a person offers something, they mean it.
Well, we're literally programmed to burden each other. Like that's because it's a reciprocal thing. That village thing.
Yeah, to, like,
is,
share the
I'm
load.
gonna burden you with my stuff, whether it's watering plants. You're going to burden me
Yeah.
with the borrowing the cup of sugar or whatever.
Yeah.
But we're made for reciprocal exchange. And the minute, like what you're saying in that is if someone offers something and you shut it down, you stop that reciprocal exchange.
Yeah.
That connectivity is done now. Like that's not happening because the next time they need something, want to come out, they're going to pull back as well because now you've set that standard.
Well, they're not going to ask you.
Exactly, because it goes back to that mirroring theory as well, right?
yeah.
So if I'm going to mirror to you that openness of, I'm going to be vulnerable enough. So can I borrow your lawnmower because mine's kind of shitting itself or whatever? Like that creates that sort of mirroring. So then next time you need something, or hey, if you're going to the store, can you pick me up a quart of milk as well?
Yeah.
Like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then it puts that in, and that becomes a language of your dynamic really quickly. In fact, it was interesting because just today, Zac and I were recording a podcast about relationship dynamics and how it's a mutual need thing, right? Like your one set of needs and another set of needs and those exchanges. So we get to program all of the dynamics in every single exchange. And I think the ones based on what you guys have said today is that a neighborhood's culture is based on those little need exchanges. Whether it's the cup of sugar or the watering the plants or the I need you to say hello and chase my puppy when it gets out of the yard or whatever.
Well,
And abundant,
go ahead.
Zach. I was going to say abundant community, that mode of thinking flips that on its head and says it's not need exchanges, it's asset exchanges.
Right.
I have
like that wording.
I have something to offer.
yeah.
For crying out loud, who will accept what I have?
Yeah.
Takers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that there's a beautiful thing. And like we talk a lot about in our therapy, we talk a lot about, that difficulty that you mentioned, Zac, about the difficulty in receiving and the difficulty in giving or asking because you are afraid to burden somebody. Yeah. And I think for a little bit, we just dispense with that a little bit and go back to that 5-year-old in the playground of like, hey, can I like have a popsicle? Do you want to be my friend or whatever? And we kick it old school like that, like really old school 5-year-old for all of us. We'll have maybe a little bit of Westmount's magical sprinkle.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Well, thank you so much for being here. Is there anything else? So, like, we've got the Instagram. Anything else that you guys want to point towards for people at home? That seems good.
We'll put the
we'll put it all in the show notes.
We'll put the website and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can go and check that out there. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been super fun.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Pleasure.
Yeah, and to everybody at home, thank you for listening to the Shift Show. You can check us out, shiftpsych.com. And
I was just going to say,
yeah,
when you get home, go introduce yourself to that neighbor.
Yeah,
that's right.
Nice. I like
perfect.
that. And also, how about this one? Let's take it one step further.
Yes,
we're going to carry on. We're going to piggyback on Jay's little ask there.
Sure.
And let's hear about it.
Yeah,
like, how'd it go?
Yeah,
like shout us out. Let us know if there's something. We want to hear if there's like some raging asshole. Then you tell them like, listen to that show, and this is what you're ruining. No,
this is what you missed.
Don't do that. Don't do that. What we want you to do instead is tell us how it went and see if can get a little bit of that neighborly spirit in your land, or also if you go creep the Westmount Community League or Abundant Communities, and you want to go steal some stuff or talk to either of these two lovely people about that, let us know how it goes. Like if you get elfed or if you elf somebody else, and we want to know how it goes.
And it can be super small. It can be a wave. It can be a hi. If you've never done that before, that's a huge step, right? So
100%.
You don't have to have them over for dinner.
Start small, do it often.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right.
Awesome.
On that one, Zac, I'll throw it back to you to close this up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Take it home.
So thank you everybody for listening, and we will see you next time on the next episode of The Shift Show.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Shift Show. Be sure to check out our website, shiftpsych.com, for more great content to help you optimize your life. Follow us on social media at ShiftPsych, and let us know if you have ideas or things you'd really like to hear about on the podcast. If you found this useful or interesting, which you probably did since you're still here, please share and review the show. And make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. This lets us know that you like what you hear so we can bring you more of it. The podcast was brought to you by ShiftPsych's results-driven mind trainers. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on The Shift Show.